All right, everybody, welcome back to Bio 10 Lab. I hope you guys had a good spring break and a good holiday week before that, but it's back to work. So we're nearing the end of our Bio 10 journey. We're getting right up here to the finish line. We've got a couple more labs. We've got two more actually after this one. So today we're going to be working on lab number 9, which is ecological interactions. So the last time that we talked, we were looking at adaptations, and if you guys remember, adaptations were tools that different organisms could use to better survive their environment. Well, organisms don't live in a vacuum. They don't live just by themselves. They, in fact, oftentimes interact with other species in their environment, and that's what creates a whole ecological community. So today we're going to look at some of the different ways that different organisms can interact with one another in order to either fulfill their role as organisms or just to exist in general. So when we say interactions, interactions are basically just any type of relationship that occurs between members of either the same species or across different species and groups. So there's 4 major types that we'll explore here in this lab. We're going to explore mutualisms, parasitisms, commensalisms, and predation interactions. And basically the way that they can be defined as a mutualism is when both species that are involved in an interaction benefit. A parasitism is where one species benefits and another species is harmed. A commensalism is where one species benefits and the other species is kind of just neutral. And the last kind of interaction, the predation, is obviously one species benefits and one species is harmed. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some examples of each of these. I'm not going to give away all the details because part of your lab activity is to look up some of these interactions yourselves and to figure out why they should be classified the way that they are. But we'll start with a list of mutualisms. So remember that mutualisms, both species are benefiting. So lichens are actually an example where one organism, one home, contains 2 different kinds of creatures. So lichens are mutualistic relationships between algae and fungi. Okay, so you'll want to look up a little bit about why that is. Corals. Corals are symbiotic relationships, symbiotic or mutualistic relationships between algae and between some of the organisms that live inside of the corals. Honeybees have a mutualistic relationship as pollinators with different kinds of flowering plants. Then parasitisms, which are my personal favorite because they're a little bit more gross. Or tapeworms, so Tenaeosolium is a good example of that. This particular tapeworm here is pork tapeworm. And the way that you can tell is because there's these structures here that are called hooks, and it's got suckers on it. So pork tapeworms have 2 mechanisms to stick inside of a potential host. And you guys can figure out the rest as to why that's a parasitism. Then we have here what's called trichina larvae, and trichina is actually another kind of worm. So worms are classified as organisms called helminths. And this worm is actually encysted, so it's formed a cyst. You can see the outside around it, and there's the actual worm inside of a piece of muscle tissue. So I'll let you guys come to the conclusion as to why that would be a parasitism. Then this one we have is clams. So you can see the clams here, bivalves. You can see the actual foot of the clam there, the opening to it. And these little structures that we call clam glochidia. And glochidia are actually the early larval forms of these little creatures here. So they grow over the gill surfaces in the clams. So if you guys know anything about the openings for gill slits, you'll know why that's a parasitism. Then our third type of interaction is what's called the commensalistic one. If you guys remember, that's where you have one organism benefiting and the other organism is neutral. So in the form of cattle egrets and cattle, these egret birds will actually sit on top of the cattle and they'll be able to see, and the cattle just kind of exist. Oh, I gave that one away. Shoot. We have the goby fish, and the goby fish interacts with other organisms inside of its environment. And then birds in a tree. So think about who's getting something out of this, the bird that's sitting up high or the tree that doesn't really move. And then finally we have competition or predation, and those competitions involve species interacting for the same resource. So they involve them each occupying the same, what we would call ecological niche. So lions and cheetahs. So think about, what do lions eat? What do cheetahs eat? Squirrels and woodpeckers. Think about squirrels. What do squirrels eat? What do woodpeckers eat? And then think about these plants. Is there any difference or anything that these particular plants down here on the rainforest floor might think about these bigger plants above them, or vice versa? And then finally we have this predation-prey, predator-prey interaction. So predator-prey, what do gazelles and lions have in common? What do bear and salmon have in common? And this guy's kind of interesting. Dellavibrio is actually what's called a predatory bacteria, right? So what do those have in common with each other? So you only have one activity this week, so it's a pretty light lab. You're going to review this PowerPoint file to look at the example interactions in them, and I want you to identify why those particular organisms are classified as the interactions that they're classified in, and you can fill that out worksheet number 1. From the organisms in the PowerPoint or from your own exploring on the internet, I want you to find one particular type of interaction that you think is the most interesting, and I want you to post that into the interactions discussion board on class. So that needs to be done by Sunday. So what do you have to do for this lab in particular? Submit an image or a PDF upload of your worksheet number 1 that's found in the modules to the link on Canvas. And then also post your favorite lab interaction to the class discussion board. So these 2 things are both due on Sunday. And then over the course of this week, you have 3 other things that are important for you to complete. You have 1, your writing assignment number 2 rough draft, and that's due Tuesday, the 14th at 11:59 p.m. Then you have your quiz number 7, which can be found in the modules as well. And then finally, you need to post your lecture ID in the lecture ID discussion board. So that's it for this week. Hope you guys have a good week, and we'll talk again soon.